Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Brazen Serpent. We're just going to be continuing our study in the book of Ezra. Um, Previously, we had discussed the people groups that dwelt in Samaria, and we discussed how they had embraced worship of Jehovah alongside many of the other gods they worshipped. And for this reason, Zerubbabel and the chief priests refused to allow the Samaritans to partake in rebuilding the temple to Jehovah due to their idolatry, worshiping various other gods. Now, you might think that sounds kind of harsh. I mean, are a lot of people involved in idolatry? Well, the issue here is that if they had really partaken in rebuilding the temple, they would have had a say in what was placed in the temple to some degree. So, the fact that they had already been worshiping all these other gods would have meant that if they were helping build the temple, they would have put their idols in the temple. And so, in order to create a distinction between what the Jews believed and what the Samaritans were believing, they told them, no, you can't partake with us to rebuild the temple. And so the Samaritans were really upset about this. They wrote a letter to Artaxerxes, and this is what it says. This is the copy of the letter that they sent him. To Artaxerxes the king, your servants, the men on this side of the river. And now let it be known to the king that the Jews who came up from you to us have come to Jerusalem, building the rebellious and bad city, and have set up its walls and joined the foundations. Now let's pause there. Had they done that? No, they had not done that yet. In fact, when the Jews were returning to the land, they were just building the temple back to Jehovah to worship him. So they were not setting up defenses around their city yet. Really, they were speaking slanderously of their people. Okay, so they continue. Let it be known now to the king that if this city is built and the walls set up again, then they will not pay toll, tribute, and tax. And so you shall cause damage to the revenue of the kings. Now, because we received support from the king's palace, and it was not proper for us to see the king's dishonor, therefore we have sent and informed the king, so that a search may be made in the book of the records of your fathers. So you shall find in the book of the records and know that this city is a rebellious city and hurtful to kings and provinces, and that they have stirred up sedition within the same city in former times, for which cause the city was destroyed. We assure the king that if this city is built again and its walls set up, by this means you shall have no portion on this side of the river. And so it says, then the king sent an answer to Rehum the chancellor, and Shimshai the scribe, and to the rest of their companions who dwell in Samaria, and to the rest beyond the river. He says, peace, and now the letter that you sent to us has been plainly read before me. And I commanded, and a search has been made, and it is found that this city in former times has made insurrection against kings, and that rebellion and sedition have been stirred up in it. There have been mighty kings also of Jerusalem, which have ruled over all countries beyond the river, and toll and tribute and tax was paid to them. Now, give the command to cause these men to cease, so that this city may not be built until another command shall be given from me. Be careful now, that you do not fail to do this. Why should damage grow to the detriment of the kings? Now, when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rehum and Shimshai the scribe and their companions, they went up in a hurry to Jerusalem to the Jews and made them cease by force and power. Then the work of the house of God that is at Jerusalem ceased. So it ceased until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Okay, and so um, obviously we see the Samaritans were partially successful in trying to prevent them from rebuilding the temple. They were mad because they weren't letting them um, essentially be part of this and to include their idolatrous practices with worship to Jehovah. Okay, and so in this, we see that Samaria, the Samaritan people, appealed to the confederacy they had with many nations. These kings surrounding Israel were all in some type of unity under the Assyrian Empire or the Persian Empire, right? And so um, they were all charged tolls and taxes, right? And they claimed as soon as the Jews finished building their temple, they would rebel against Persia, refusing to pay tolls, taxes, and cause damage to the kings. And the irony about this situation was that the Jews were not rebuilding the temple out of rebellion to the Persian Empire. Cyrus, the king of Persia, had explicitly given them permission to do what they were doing, and they were merely exercising their freedom of worship to God. But the Samaritans simply hated the Jews because they refused to let them partake in this. And so we already settled Zerubbabel and the chief priests refused to let them partake because of idolatry. This ticked them off. They were determined to completely prevent them from exercising their freedom of worship. In the eyes of the Samaritans, the Jews were not accepting of them, they were not embracing them, and so the Samaritans were determined to ruin them. We have no real reason to think the Jews would not have paid tribute, taxes, or tolls to the Assyrian Empire. After all, they left on good grace of King Cyrus, the king of Persia. And when Jesus later speaks of what the scriptures teach, he instructed them to pay taxes to Caesar. Okay, so out of the scriptures, Jesus taught them to pay their taxes. The scriptures do not teach us not to pay taxes to whatever nation we are under. And so, whether it was the Persian Empire or the Roman Empire, the Jewish people were actually instructed to obey the authorities and to live peacefully. But the Samaritans were painting them in a completely different light. Even with this, for them to live peacefully as an example to the people, it did not mean they had to embrace the pagan religions of the Samaritans, right? They had every right to worship Jehovah the way that they believed was right. But the Samaritans were telling them, no, you have to embrace us. You have to let us partake in rebuilding the temple. And they were like, no, no, this is not right. This is not what we believe is right. And so they tried to create hardship for them. And unfortunately, Artaxerxes believed them because of this, right? He sees that in times past, the Jews had fought wars with some of the kings in that area, but obviously, you go back and you study why they fought those wars, they really varied. In many cases, it was because the nations surrounding them were oppressive and seeking to completely control their worship and various other things. Also, those nations were sacrificing babies to their gods and various other things. So there was a lot going on back then. And so they're only paying attention to certain historical facts about the Jewish people. And they're painting them as if they had essentially all been rebellious and evil. Um, Again, the irony of this whole situation is that similar accusations were raised against many Christians in their day. During Jesus' day, the disciples and Jesus were seen as troublemakers in Israel. The Pharisees, who were considered teachers of the Jews, and scribes blasted them as if they had been disobedient to the scriptures and the Roman government. Many times when the Pharisees came to Jesus, they tried to make him stumble in his words, trying to get Jesus to teach the people not to pay taxes, but Jesus taught the exact opposite. And so what were they doing? They were really trying to show that Jesus was rebellious and get him in trouble. But his teachings proved they were not rebellious, and he was not rebellious. And so they were merely instructed to do what was right, no matter what. So if the Roman government instructed all men to worship Caesar as God, the Christians were taught from the scriptures to refuse to do this out of obedience to God. In many other ways, the Christians lived peacefully amongst the Romans and obeyed their laws. They paid their taxes, they did what was right. But because they did not embrace their pagan religion, they were viewed as rebellious and wicked. For similar reasons, Peter says in his letter, "Dearly beloved, I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your lifestyle honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works, which they shall behold, glorify God in the day of visitation." And so he's saying they might be right now accusing you as evil, but one day they're going to realize the things you did were right. They were good. You are not seeking to be disobedient. You are not rebellious. You are merely being obedient to God. Okay, and so it was common for the surrounding pagan nations to accuse God's people as troublemakers, as rebellious, and more, simply because they refused to engage in sinful behavior and compromise their beliefs through idolatry. Many Christians during the Reformation were treated the exact same way. The Catholic Church labeled all those rebaptizing people from the Catholic Church Anabaptists, because Anabaptist means to rebaptize. And thus also the Catholic Church called them heretics. And it was a common practice for heretics to be burned and to be killed. And so in many instances, the Waldensians were slaughtered, many women and children, all because they did not partake in the worship of the Catholic Church. They were viewed as troublemakers. The Catholic Encyclopedia describes Anabaptists as a violent and extremely radical body of ecclesiastico civil reformers. And so you already get the idea. They painted the Anabaptists, those who refused to partake in their worship, as violent and radical. They used these words to make people feel like the Anabaptists were evil. But were they evil? No, many of them were pacifists. They refused to engage in war. And so many of the Anabaptists were the exact opposite of the Catholic Church and those in their body. Um, an article called Apostolici, it was a Catholic Church article. It describes their character as deceptive and dangerous. Again, words used of these Anabaptists that are intended to get the people to view them as evil. Saint Bernard called upon the civil authorities to take action against them. And throughout history, they were characterized as people who disobeyed the law of the land, people who attempted to undermine properly constituted authority, people who disturbed the social peace. That was what was said of Anabaptists, even though many of them were obedient and many of them were really gracious people, all because they refused to view the Catholic Church as the one true church and rebaptized many of them, preaching the gospel to them. Because essentially, the Anabaptists believed many in the Catholic Church were not truly born again, that they were teaching something contradictory to the gospel. And so, because of this, the Catholic Church was inflamed and angry with them. Furthermore, the Catholic Church describes some of these Anabaptists even more strangely, saying, the founding of which was signalized by a reign of terror and indescribable orgies. This is not that much more unique compared to what some of the Romans accused Christians of in their day, because when the Christians would gather in their homes and eat bread together and give each other a holy kiss, they'd blow that out of proportion and say, oh, yeah, they're getting together to have orgies and all this various other stuff, and that wasn't true. Many of them were just getting together, eating food together, and worshiping God out of simplicity. But the Romans blew it out of proportion. The Catholic Church blew it out of proportion. And so it's honestly ironic that they even said these things of them because the Catholic Church was known, their monks and popes, for heinous sexual behavior. They also accused the Anabaptists for the Peasants' War in 1524. But was it really their fault? No, actually, Luther, Martin Luther, who was a Protestant, and although he was against the Catholic Church, he still kind of sided with the Catholic Church on many things. He actually stirred up many people to fight the peasants. And so the Catholic Church and many Protestants actually were responsible, not the Anabaptists. Again, the Anabaptists, in a large way, were pacifists compared to the Protestants and Catholic Church. Historically, however, you'll find um, these Anabaptists, they did seek to obey the authorities above them. There were a few radical groups amongst them, but they were not all like that. Again, many of them were pacifists. Um, okay, but another thing, we see how that many of God's people have been construed as rebellious troublemakers by many wicked men. Okay, so during this time, the Samaritans, they caused the Jews to cease from rebuilding the temple. But Haggai and the other prophets stirred them on to continue. Again, another reason they might have been able to say, "See, look how rebellious they are. Even though we commanded them not to do it, look how wicked they are." And so when they're questioned as to why they're continuing in rebuilding the temple, when Artaxerxes had commanded them explicitly to stop, they appealed to the Persian commandment of Cyrus before him. And so Darius searched the records to see whether it was true Cyrus gave them permission. And when Darius found out they were right, not only did they find Cyrus had given them clear permission to exercise freedom of worship, Darius also says, "Also have I made a decree that whoever alters this word, let timber be pulled down from his house, and being set up, let him be hanged on it, and let his house be made of a dunghill for this. And may the God who caused his name to dwell there destroy all kings and people who put forth their hand to alter and destroy this house of God that is in Jerusalem. I, Darius, have made a decree, let it be done with speed." And so Darius flips the script, right? Before, the people are saying, "Oh, they're not going to pay taxes. They're not going to pay their tributes. They're not going to pay the tolls." Darius looks at all of this and he says, "You know what? Instead of forcing the Jews to pay taxes and tribute," he says this, "From the king's goods, even from the tribute beyond the river, expenses shall immediately be given to these men, so that they are not hindered. And what they have need of, young bulls, rams, and lambs for the burnt offerings of the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, and oil, according to the appointment of the priests who are at Jerusalem, let it be given to them day by day, without fail, that they may offer sacrifices of sweet aroma to the God of heaven and pray for the life of the king and of his sons." And you'll notice Darius included that little segment mentioning praying for the king and his sons, because God had before told the Jewish people if they had ever been under a nation, in captivity to a nation, to pray for the king and their people and to make sacrifice for their people. So the Jews were not to live rebelliously, and nowhere in the scriptures did it ever imply that, but to have goodwill towards their captors and to love their enemies. Nothing about the scriptures commanded the Jews to live rebelliously or out of spite to others. Yet, time and time again, that is the way God's people are often portrayed. They are viewed as troublemakers. It was said of the disciples, "But the Jews which believed not, moved with envy, took unto them certain lewd fellows of the baser sort, and gathered a company, and set all the city on an uproar, and assaulted the house of Jason, and sought to bring them out to the people. And when they found them not, they drew Jason and certain brethren unto the rulers of the city, crying, These that have turned the world upside down are come hither also, whom Jason hath received, and these all do contrary to the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus." And they troubled the people and the rulers of the city when they heard these things. And so the disciples, what are they being accused of? They're being accused of rebelling against Caesar, against the authorities in Israel, all because they preached Jesus Christ as God, the King of Kings, and said that all men needed to repent and believe in his name. The Christians did not refuse to pay taxes, they did not disobey the laws, they merely preached the gospel out of love for all men. And because of this, they were estranged from many in society and labeled as evil. And this is the reality many of us live in. We've preached the gospel, and some call us hateful and unwilling to accept others in love. And that isn't true. We just refuse to embrace idolatry and pagan beliefs. We preach the truth and seek to win others to Christ. So they draw us out of our homes and present us before the legal system. People don't realize this. This still happens in our own country on a regular basis. I'm constantly hearing of Christians I know being abused by the legal system, being drawn out by people calling them evil, and yet this is where we're at. In the end, God's going to turn our situation around. Those who died at the hands of the wicked will be raised from the dead, and God will cause many of the nations to willingly come and bless God's people in his city. And this will not come by us raising our sword, but by preaching God's love to all men. So then in Revelation, Christ says to his saints, They worship the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. So he's talking about the Antichrist and those worshiping him. It says they worship the beast, saying, "Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" Okay, and so they're appealing to the fact that nobody can fight him, nobody can resist him. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And so the Antichrist is killing God's people. That's what he's doing here. He's overcoming them. That's what the idea being given here. They're being slain. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. As Christians, we believe Christ will ultimately come to avenge us. We have no need to fight men to get them to submit to Christ. We preach the love of Jesus, and in his appointed time, he will avenge our death. He will raise us up from the dead. All the nations of the world will see him for who he is, and they will see that we were not evil. This is the patience of the saints. There are some who think that by the sword they will conquer and overcome all things, but it's not true. You don't overcome by killing and by greed. You overcome by the love of Christ.